Not
met.
like you're being interviewed, you know?
No, it's gonna be a cool conversation. I mean, we had that
Yeah,
hour-long chat back in October, and I've hung out with Mike a few times at these conferences,
sweet.
and so
Nice.
we're all
Yeah.
about conversation for sure.
And if I didn't mention already, I really appreciate you making time with us. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Bear. I appreciate you having me on, dude.
Justin and I have got to hang in person on multiple events now. So we were actually right next to each other during that Beats and Breath experience at Confluence last month.
Oh,
Um,
fun. First.
yeah, yeah, that was cool, man. And actually, those guys are coming out to Music and Sky to do a more like a kind of a different experience, but on main stage, like prime time in the morning, I think at 11 or 10 in the morning on Saturday. And it's actually going to be a live instrumentation with Johnny Buffalo doing a live set while Chris leads the breath work. No cannabis on this one. This is just straight Music and Sky style breath work.
Nice.
It's going to be
That's no
rad.
fun.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, hey, we're live. So stoked to have Justin on with us. I'm gonna hit record and we'll fire this up. Yeah, and we were talking pre-show. We had Justin on a pre-chat back in October to actually, I'm gonna save this for the recording. Here we go. Let's just record this. Here
Yeah,
we go.
go for it.
And boom, we're back for another episode of Alfacast. I'm Mike Winner, and I'm here as always with the Bastion of Truth, Mr. Dr. Bear Paul Lando, coming to you live and direct from the great state of Jefferson, where freedom still reigns supreme up here on the Smith River. It's misting and raining outside as we speak. Seems like the Cretans want to continue the weather manipulation. It's supposed to be spring here, and really winter is just holding on, Bear. We had a frost warning, was that yesterday? Unbelievable, but it's all good. We're turning it around and we're going into spring, and we're gonna have the best
And Deb and
crops
I
ever.
called on the powers that be and the elementals to protect our crops from any frost, and it didn't touch us. So nice try, you, whoever you are.
Exactly. Yeah, we had the same thing here. And hey, I don't have to fix my water systems yet. The rain's actually quite welcome. I have to get out there and get all that set up before it's because here it stops raining around into May, and then it doesn't rain for like 4 months. So we might get an occasional shower. But also, I'm changing that, Bear. We're bringing rains back in the summer here. So, hey, today's show is going to be awesome. We have Justin Leslie on with us, a true, as Marty Leeds in the chat said here, a true American hero. Shout out to Marty in the chat here. Yeah, and I've had the pleasure of hanging with Justin on multiple events now at Music and Sky and Confluence, and I must say he is the real deal. He is just totally sincere from the heart, gentlemen. So it's our pleasure to have him on today. Speaking of Music and Sky, June 20th through the 24th, come out and see Justin. He'll be doing a stage talk there, telling his story. And Bear Lando will be on stage Sunday telling his story. So if you haven't gotten your tickets yet, check the show notes below. There's a special link with a 10% off from Alphabetic. Grab your tickets today. We also have some more budget cost glamping accommodations that will be released shortly for those flying in, and also the shuttle that will be going from San Francisco Airport up there if you're having problems finding ways to get there. Last, also, there's ways to get on our Music and Sky platform or the Alphabetic platform and talk to others going if you want a caravan, if you're in need of camping stuff. The point here is if you're being called to come to Music and Sky and there's something stopping you, message us. We will work with you to get you there. It's important that we all meet this summer and come together, because that is the way that we move forward. The way that we stop the AI Borg system is we come together in person in harmony and we create the solutions together. So love you guys. Yeah, anything else, Bear?
Yeah, one comment. Since Marty's with us today, Marty Leeds, just want to let him know thank you for sending your recent children's book, and we're enjoying it with our grandson. It's the Adventures of Grandpa Paul, which is perfect because my grandson is into the Paw Patrol, and anyway, you'd have to know that if you've got grandkids. So, Marty, awesome job. And everybody get over to Gnostic Academy and buy the book for your kids and grandkids.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Well, thank you guys again for having me on, Mike and Bear. I've long time coming, like we were talking about offline, but and huge shout out to the Marty Leeds for helping me, put this whole story together. And I think it's really cool that Music and Sky, Mike, you were talking about that. Music and Sky was a full circle thing for all of this part of my story to come together. So I'll let you take the first crack at, where we want to take this convo.
Yeah. Music and Sky is where I first met you and heard your story, and where you met Marty and had that connection. And that's the whole point here, right? That's why we do the event. It's where the magic happens, because we're there in person. We're in a special place, disconnected from the internets and the phone, and just coming together in a heart resonance that's powerful. So yeah, awesome, man. And we are the OGs. Like you've been on this just crazy media blitz going on with Stupid Peters and all these other characters. And I'm sorry, that guy. No, he had you on, which is awesome. And just
Yeah,
a
I'm a
slew
former
of
bounty hunter too, so be careful.
No, much love to Stu, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, but no, Amanda Vollmer had you on, and just a ton of brave channels that are out there telling the truth. Alex Zach, and we had you. We were talking to you back in October to have you on hella early, and it didn't pan out because you wanted to re-strategize. We even had you booked and everything, and then you
Yeah.
decided to cancel because you wanted to re-strategize around the release of the documentary, because you were like in pre-production on it then.
Yeah, it wasn't even a thing at that point. So it was definitely, part of my heart was like telling me this is jumping the gun and this doesn't feel right. So I'm glad we can do this now. I'm glad that the documentary's out there with my testimony essentially for anyone to go to and really see my whole story versus, missing out on certain bits and pieces. I feel like with interviews, and would the media blitz have been the same initially? I'm not fully sure yet, so I'm glad I've done it this way. And yes, you guys are the OGs that wanted to interview me initially, and I'm sorry it didn't work out the first time, but I'm glad that we can do this full circle now.
Well, it's great because
All in divine timing.
Yes.
yeah, and you've gotten yourself out there, and people can go watch those interviews. Highly recommend watching the one with Alex Zach. As you know, with Alpha Vedic, we're probably going to touch on a lot of different things in a traditional interview, so it's good that those are out there. But yeah, much light has been shed on the machinations behind the great plandemic of 2020. For the more discerning segment of the populace, any motive behind the immense psyop can only be viewed as less than altruistic. Societal life was thoroughly remodeled to serve the devious whims of a predatory few, while many became unwitting lab rats at the expense of generations to come. Alfacast originated as a forum to share a wide diversity of perspectives and experience, and we haven't shied from putting ourselves on the line when necessary as well. We joined in with physicians and educators worldwide during the aforementioned events to share truth that we hoped would mitigate the intended destruction and suffering. We're thrilled to entertain a very special guest on this installment of Alphacast, Justin here, to give our audience an insider glimpse of business as usual within a very notorious quote unquote drug company. In all likelihood, this interview will find its way to censorship bin with so many of our past episodes, but it will remain available on our membership portal. Also, I posted a backup channel here. I will pin it on the chat over on Rumble. We're also on Unite. We're on Odyssey. We're on Facebook, a number of other platforms we're streaming currently. So if this does go down on LooshTube, where a lot of our audience is on the chat, we can hop over there. We'll use our best hobo code today to stay live on the old DoucheTube, because that's where we find a lot of new folks who can discover you, Justin. That's why we stayed on this platform. We use their technologies against them. Justin Leslie, a scientist turned whistleblower and journalist, worked on Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine platform as a formulation analytical scientist from March 21st to April 22nd, 2022. Collaborating with Project Veritas for 4 months, Leslie uncovered controversial information about Pfizer's activities. Shocker. Uh, Instead of blowing the whistle, CEO James O'Keefe offered him a job, leading him to join Project Veritas as a journalist. After a brief tenure and we'll get into that, what happened there. After a brief tenure at O'Keefe Media Group, Leslie resigned and began producing the film project, Project Whistleblower, a documentary recounting his experiences with Pfizer and the alternative media landscape since August 2023. His firsthand accounts will do more than raise eyebrows. And so, yeah, we're going to go deep into all of that today. Thanks for joining us today, Justin, and thanks for all that you've done over the last few years. Bear Lando, take it away.
Yeah, and thank you for being with us, Justin. It's really a treat to have you here today. And as you are aware that this subject matter is a lot in my wheelhouse, and I went down this road a long time ago, treating vaccinated, damaged kids, and then during the early AIDS epidemic years, I really got my eyes open because my clinical experience did not match with the virus theory. In fact, I was able to disprove it in real time. Here we are again, and also some of us in our circles that were having similar experiences back there from the 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way through to present time, and we're comparing notes. We had some good, let's just say, intel from the horse's mouth that there would be a planned event of biological false flag, if you will, right about the time when it happened. And we were actually alerting people to that over 20 years ago, what they had up their sleeve. So here we are, and it wasn't any surprise to us. And, we had a great talk before in that, you were mentioning that your background, which is amazing. We want, you to tell our audience about it. But because of your experience, you might be using that background to go into maybe some things that will bear more fruit to help people down the road, looking at what we would call alternative medical solutions and things these days, which in my view are mainstream. And the stuff that we'll be talking about today is actually the alternative. I don't like to think of euthanasia and genocide and those sorts of things as mainstream medicine, but that's just me. What the heck? So maybe we'll start out today. Forgive this, but I know you've done a lot of great interviews lately, and we always have to start with, well, how'd you get into this, and what's your background? And so, if you could give us the cliff notes, not to minimize the importance of your background because it's substantial, but then we want to maybe add a little bit of depth and go into some places that you haven't, gone in prior interviews that I think would be of special interest to our audience and the type of people that tune into us. So thanks again for being with us. So how the heck did you get here in the first place?
Thank you, Dr. Barrett. Thanks again, Mike, for having me on. So how the heck did I get to where I was at least, inserting myself inside Pfizer was I went to school at University of Rhode Island for a degree in pharmaceutical and biomedical sciences. So how did I get to wanting to go into pharmaceuticals is we were talking offline where I have this, multi-system dis-ease that I was diagnosed at the age of 10 called tuberous sclerosis complex. And so it's really just a multi-system disorder that affects all organs of the body. It affects, your fingernails, your skin lesions. And so for those who don't know about it, I encourage you to look it up, but it's linked to benign tumors, epilepsy, and autism. And so when I was diagnosed at that young age, it's actually a much later diagnosis than the typical diagnosis. Most people are diagnosed by the age of 2. So I was questioning, like, hey, why am I diagnosed at the age of 10? But I had this really mild version. So all throughout high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to get into until, I just said, hey, I'll get into science, either pharmaceutical sales or drug development. And so, that spearheaded me into applying to University of Rhode Island pharmacy program in a bachelor's of, biomedical sciences. And so I really got into pharmacology my junior year, really got into pharmacokinetics, pharmaceutics, the whole 9 yards. And, I was one step below of what a PharmD would have really been doing. And I would have had to go to school for 2 more years for that. So my bachelor's was essentially something that got me into a low level scientist program with big pharmaceutical companies, so it could have been Pfizer, it could have been Johnson and Johnson, it could have been Behringer, it could have been any of these big pharmaceutical companies that I was going to be a good candidate to work for. But when COVID happened, I couldn't find a job with any of these companies. There were hiring freezes and everyone was just like scared to bring people on. It was just, mass hysteria. And so, I graduated through Zoom University, literally like talking to professors through Zoom and didn't get to walk. And so I started studying for a master's program to get into at Rutgers University because there was a professor who had done world-renowned research on tuberous sclerosis, TSC. And so I never actually got to work with her. I sent her a few emails. She explained how, she's bogged down because of COVID and her lab was all shut down. And it basically became another semester of Zoom University again, where I was completely miserable and I was thrown into this. It was a simulation of a M1 program, essentially, Bear. So, I know you went through medical school,
Yeah.
all your doctorate programs. It was a lot of that, and it was a lot of not getting the answers that I really wanted either. It was a lot of regurgitation of my pharmaceutical program from URI, and I just really got to asking the basic questions of, like, we're not getting to the root cause of really any of these, and we're just applying drugs to symptoms, and this is just a lot of memorization, and I'm not exactly learning anything, so that's where I started saying, hey, I don't even know if this is the right course for me to be in, but I might as well start working, and see if I can, start making some money in the pharmaceutical world. And that's how, I started applying for, not just jobs at Pfizer. I applied to 4 other pharmaceutical companies, and Pfizer was just the one that came calling after. So I was in my master's program full time. And since I was so miserable, I was just doing it part time with one class essentially. And Pfizer came calling. So that's how the beginning all plays out.
So your motivation was you were trying to figure out how to heal yourself, and you
Yes.
were going through the conventional means, thinking that, if you can get into these advanced circles, there must be a solution because, wow, we're on the apex of science and all these, we are at the greatest time ever of medicine. Were you coming at that perspective originally?
100%, Mike. You're spot on. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking. I said I'm gonna get into drug discovery and cure, come up with a drug in drug discovery that is going to cure TSC or cure cancer, like just shoot for the stars. And, that's what my mindset was. And, so that's all the programming also of going through my biology and chemistry and pharmacology classes of thinking that I was going to be that beacon of light essentially that is able to cure these diseases because they don't really explain how you cure diseases. They say that and it's all propaganda that vaccines are what was curing polio and all these other, diseases and viruses back in, we'll go back into history for all that rabbit hole. But um, I had to snap out of it, so absolutely I wanted to heal myself, and my goal is to still heal myself. I just, my body is impacted in a way from this dis-ease in a way that I've had this talk with Amanda before, and she thinks that there is a way to fully cure myself in a way. It's just, it's a long, long, arduous road of doing that based off of this.
Yeah. As we always say in all things, there's always a remedy. And just having been in the business for a long time, if you don't get in the mindset of conventional indoctrination, you will find that remedy. You just have to be open for it. And, your story, as far as the part of, getting into these studies because of your own situation, isn't that unusual. I had a number of colleagues, when I was in school, they were in there for the same exact reason. I got into, medicine, as I told you, because I wanted to be a sports doctor. I was a jock, and certain events and experiences brought me into other situations. And interestingly, it was the whole vaccination issue that kind of got me over the other side of the fence, because I was working in emergency services medicine. And I went to see a chiropractor for an old football injury, and I just thought, okay, I don't know what these guys do, but I'll check it out. And I really liked the guy, and he actually opened my eyes to the whole vaccine issue, and one thing led to another. So that was my avenue of going deeper into things beyond just orthopedic medicine. So, as they say, the Lord works in mysterious ways, and we all, think we're doing one thing when in reality we're getting led into another thing. So here we are. So maybe take us in the next little step. Okay, now you're at Pfizer, and what happened there?
So my role was a formulation and analytical scientist. So what does that mean for the audience? I was on a small scale manufacturing floor where I was essentially taking samples from a small scale manufacturing team that was doing research and development. So they were formulating brand new formulations for this mRNA platform. And it wasn't just COVID, it was for the flu vaccine that they're working on, as well as self-amplifying RNA platforms for flu and COVID. And they have RSV, they have a super long list now, but being there for a year and 1 month, that's what I was doing of analytical work on that small scale manufacturing team. So I was working on a fluorescence assay called ribogreen, where I was testing percent encapsulation, I was testing the concentration of the RNA, I was testing the percent integrity of the RNA, and a lot of it really just had to do with stability studies to make sure that this drug product was up to speed 6 months in, 8 months in, 9 months in, 1 year into being frozen at minus 80 degrees Celsius, which I honestly thought was the most ridiculous part of this drug product, the fact that we had to store it in these minus 80 degrees Celsius freezers. And so that's also where some of the potential fraud that I end up exposing during my work with Project Veritas leads to, with the formulation of how the vaccine was stored at minus 80 degrees Celsius, but for the 5 to 11-year-old approval for their emergency use authorization, Pfizer and the FDA came together with a bioequivalence excuse, essentially, to not do any clinical trials on the tris buffer vaccine that ended up being approved. So, as a young guy, 23 years old, going through pharmaceutical school, 4 years of the ringer essentially, and then part of a master's program where I still was learning about clinical work, I thought it was a huge red flag that Pfizer and the FDA essentially colluded together to say that we don't have to put this vaccine into kids at all, and we can just come up with a bioequivalence with this other formulation. So we all know, all three of us on this call know that all vaccines are essentially, not safe or effective, and they're essentially bioweapons, if you want to call
And
them.
they were And from the start, there has never been a vaccine with a true intention or motive to prevent anything because they don't do that.
Absolutely.
You know, yeah. So, boy, we're on a real YouTube suicide mission here, I think.
Yeah, so playing in that realm of
Absolutely.
what is real and what is not real, even in the part of the realm that, like these people should have been doing the clinical data on this, hokey pokey that ended up getting approved. It was fraud, even in their realm, part of the realm. The whole thing obviously is fraudulent, but that is one of the things that I was uncovering on the inside when I was working with Project Veritas as well. So,
So,
um,
Justin, what was the moment when you switched, when you went as a well-meaning college grad, undergrad, looking for a solution for your health issues, and then you realized that you started to wake up? Because I know now you're like full board, like team terrain, and understand viruses don't exist, and you get all that, but obviously you were coming in with total different perspective, believing in the system. What was it that you know shifted
it
you?
was great question, Mike. And it's definitely a gradual awakening, but I knew that there was fraud. Like I knew what was going on the inside of Pfizer was essentially crimes against humanity. So I took the role knowing that there was an opportunity for not to stay on the sidelines and make a difference and become a whistleblower. I knew that from the get-go. And so I took the role and essentially inserted myself to see it all for myself too, just be the critical thinker that I was and see if I could make an impact essentially. I didn't go in there like 100%, oh, I'm going to be a whistleblower, but I knew that there was all criminal negligence and malfeasance and crimes against humanity playing out. So, I'd say 6 months into working at Pfizer was, I mean, it was a real gradual thing of just seeing people dying, myocarditis, this, and, neurological symptoms, that, and Guillain-Barré, this, all of these symptoms happening and paying attention to the alternative media circles from, March 2021 through August, September of 2021. I had had enough. I was going to and from work, literally crying and just feeling so guilty that I was on the inside of Pfizer and I was, essentially contributing to this genocide that I was witnessing in real time. So, can I pinpoint an exact day? Not necessarily, but it was, you could argue that it was even before I took the job at Pfizer, but where I started to want to make a difference was about 6 months in. So I hope that makes sense.
I would call it a destiny or fate myself. Obviously you were, on another level came in to have this experience. But okay, so it goes much deeper, don't you think, than just, oh, I realize that these guys are lying and killing people intentionally. But, once you get that veil lifted, there's another whole substantial consciousness shift that goes with it, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it didn't fully click for me, whereas like viruses are literally not real and don't exist. I thought for a majority of my time at Pfizer that it was the flu rebranded, um, which still, didn't make a lot of sense either. But the veil of consciousness where I had gone through all of this education and realizing that it was all completely just fake was a lot to accept and stomach that what I was taught was completely wrong. It was all a fallacy. And I don't know, I guess I had the testicular fortitude essentially to get over that relatively quickly once I came across this road of cognitive dissonance of like, am I going to buy into viruses for the rest of my life? Like, no, once I came across it, I just was using my critical thinking skills and came across, Alex Zek, came across you guys, and it was towards the end of my time at Pfizer after I really had um, come across all of this information of virology being a complete nothing burger. But it happened. And so, during my Project Veritas experience on the inside of Pfizer, I was very tapped into the fact that COVID wasn't isolated at all. And I was like right there in the sense of virology being a complete sham, but I wasn't fully there until I think after the fact of PV not wanting to release my whistleblower story. But I mean, I was not fitting into their narrative either. I was telling these people like, guys, COVID doesn't even exist. With
You were
with
saying that
journalists,
inside Pfizer?
I was saying that to the Project Veritas
Oh,
journalists
got
that
it.
I wrote a article about the whole thing, and then I submitted that, and then I made edits to it, and I said, listen, the FDA is using SARS-CoV-1 instead of SARS-CoV-2 for these PCR tests. So I was in that part of my awakening process during my whole
Yeah.
Project
So
Well,
Veritas experience.
that's where the rubber meets the road. You have a lot of people out there that are, saying it's pro-choice and you shouldn't be forced to do stuff. And they're saying good things, but very few people will go into the definitive proof that there's actually no such thing as a virus in the first place. Whether they think that's necessary to retain credibility because of the mass indoctrination, won't allow most people to accept that level of truth. Or, at worst, maybe some of those guys are controlled op in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bear, you talked about consciousness, and I think there's just layers to this awakening too, like in the
Yes.
sense of, the mainstream narrative was, oh, this was coming from what, the pangolin or the bat soup, or it was coming from some wet market that was all,
yeah,
nonsense, all
zoonotic
nonsense.
transfer,
Yeah, and then there's the Wuhan Institute.
Doorknobs and toilet seats. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
But not Amazon boxes.
right, and then they want the goal is really to suck everyone into the Wuhan Institute of Virology lab leak at the very end of this 3-4 years of, oh, we were duped into thinking it was this wet market, and now it's clearly it was this lab leak, which we know it's not. It's just that's they want to suck people into that and prevent the critical thinking of going outside of, oh, virology is a complete another sham too.
I think
So,
somebody watched Batman 2 and got the idea, the Penguin versus Batman. They're
yeah,
like, there we go. There's the pandemic.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's absolute nonsense. So when you were inside Pfizer and seeing this, what was the level of professionalism you were dealing with there? I'm trying to get a sense of who these characters are that are actually. Did you get any sense that there was a somewhat of an understanding that a lot of what they're doing? I mean, do they all believe in what they're doing?
I'd say the 99%, 95 to 99% really believed that what we were doing was for the greater good. So that's where we get into the cognitive dissonance conversation again, where, these people are just, acting like robots, essentially doing the job, doing the dirty job, thinking that they're doing good things for humanity. But I was working with a lot of young people. So I was one of the youngest, but I don't even think I was the youngest person working on my floor. And so I think that's really how Pfizer was essentially desperate to hire young people, but they also know that, these people are fresh out of their indoctrination camps of university. Like, let's just throw them into these low-level scientist roles. So, I was working with 25, 26, 27-year-olds when I was 23. And in the sense of professionalism, I was working with some PhDs, but I mean, I think even those people didn't know any better, Mike, and um, weren't necessarily asking the critical questions of like, this is a global clinical trial that is potentially going to harm millions of people if we don't do this right. And obviously once you get past the virology thing, it's obviously all going to be genocide, but these people weren't really asking those critical questions until I, was doing what I was doing, obtaining the information with Project Veritas. Like with the documentary, there's, I present a conversation I had with my manager, Conwall Gill, who explains, this really 50-year long conspiracy of how this mRNA technology has been around for over 50 years when they were working on it, back in the 1950s and 60s, and they could never get it approved due to all of these side effects, is what the direct quote she essentially says in context. And then says that the emergency use authorization with this, scamdemic was the reason that they were going to, and she says we, as in Pfizer and Moderna, with this mRNA technology, get through it now, meaning they were using this emergency use authorization on paper just to usher in this mRNA technology, this mRNA platform that they knew wasn't going to ever go into people's arms unless they had this fear-mongering show from coming from the mainstream and even the alternative media worlds. So that's a little ramble, but
Did you get a sense that there was on the higher ups that you interface with just sort of this hunger for sort of to, there's money involved, right? And like their jobs are like, how are those higher ups paid? Are they just on a salary? Do they get additional benefits if they get the vaccine released?
I believe there were incentives
Mhm.
involved, but don't quote me on that. But I mean, they were paid handsomely, and I believe with the fact that they were able to get this vaccine to market in 9 months to, a year, and then they had all these variants coming out, and they needed the booster shots manufactured and formulated in record time as well. They were I believe that they were certainly getting some sort of 30,000 here, 40,000 there if you were like executive level running the show. So that also, I think, creates that cognitive dissonance of, well, I'm getting paid so handsomely, I'm helping all these people in the world, but it prevents them from really doing the ethical, moral thing of asking the right question. Are people actually dropping dead from these vaccines that I have firsthand knowledge and experience with working on? So I hope that makes sense.
Well,
I
there's different tiers. You have the greed factor that hits that corporate tier that is in it for profits. But then, the dumbest people are actually on the front lines. My first certification was at Stanford, and as a young student, you're in this impressive institution, and you just figure, wow, if I don't learn it here, then it just doesn't exist. So you're really the most indoctrinated when you have that kind of education. Plus, your ego gets a little involved. You don't want to investigate any, further than what you've been taught because, God, what if it wasn't true? And, I wasted all this time and went through this grief. And then on the research level, which I was never involved with that, I was just more of a medical student, but the research type people, they're all compartmentalized on top of it. So, you've got one person working on one little piece of the puzzle here, and down the hall or in some other place, or someone else is doing other things, and they are deliberately not allowed to compare notes. And in fact, in the aftermath of when AIDS hit its peak, there was over 300 researchers worldwide that all started connecting the dots and talking to each other, and they all got offed. They all had these mysterious accidents. They're falling out of windows and found their cars parked at bridges with nobody in it, and
yeah,
so there's been really a lot of wow, just nasty stuff going on. And then that brings us into the last piece of why folks aren't out there talking about it more is because they know there could be severe repercussions, not just for their career, but actually to their life.
absolutely. And Mike, I actually wanted to add on one other thing to what you were saying with the higher ups questioning everything. On the inside of Pfizer, every single day you had to wear a mask, unless, and they were starting to potentially push before I left that you could take the mask off if you were like fully vaccinated. So everyone was masked up and it was just a huge fear mongering campaign. And no one knew my vaccination status because I was working through contracting agency, but there was a, it just creates that fear effect of, everyone needs to be afraid and make sure you're getting vaccinated. And if, you weren't wearing your mask like as soon as you got up from your lunch table, almost, it was like, oh my God, he's a conspiracy theorist or something like that. Like I felt so afraid and like I was walking on eggshells, that I was like the only one really asking these questions on the inside of my head. But since the release of this documentary, I can say that there are some people from my Andover campus that have reached out through one source who they're friends with that said that they knew that this vaccine is not safe or effective. Obviously, it's a kill shot essentially, and they wouldn't take it either. So there were a handful of people that feel exactly the way I do. Maybe they don't feel the same way about virology, but they felt the same way about the vaccine and wouldn't take it. And so, I'm out here on a limb doing all this by myself, but there were people that feel the same way about what I'm doing now. So,
Amazing. Yeah. And that's why we do
In
the work, right? Because it's always, every day someone new wakes up, right? And so when Barry, you have something to say? Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to continue on and see. So you're in Pfizer and you're seeing all this happening and you're coming to realization that there's a problem here and you're in a position where you can do something, right? So you decide to act. What do you decide to do?
well, I reached out to Project Veritas and, you say do something, and their motto is be brave, do something, So I kind of got sucked into reaching out to them and only them because I didn't trust the mainstream media, obviously. So, the next best thing was Project Veritas. I'm seeing James O'Keefe and all these undercover journalists and undercover stories on, election fraud. And then, oh, they're getting stories on the vaccine. And excuse me, they're saying, reach out to us if you're on the inside of one of these big pharmaceutical giants. Reach out to Veritas Tips at protonmail.com. So I reached out to them after the Jody O'Malley whistleblower story, where she was a nursing whistleblower from HHS from Arizona, where she had submitted some undercover recordings from the inside of her hospital, where there was a doctor talking about how, the vaccine essentially is full of shit is what the direct quote was. And she had a lot of information on improper VAERS reporting, which, was all of the hysteria that was happening in late 2021, where, you know, people that were awake to what the vaccines were doing were also awake to the fact that VAERS reporting was underreported by what, 99% essentially, something like that. So that's
No,
why
I've been. Go ahead. Well, I was
no, go.
just going to say I've been a little disappointed with some of the bombshells from Project Veritas. They're supposedly announcing one later today. It's like they don't quite. They're a little anticlimactic, and one of the most viral ones having to do with Pfizer, I believe, also. They got this one guy on film who was just obviously kind of a whack job. And so I'm watching that and I'm saying, okay, couldn't they have gotten somebody a little bit more credible than that? And I mean, this guy was just, he was not playing with a full deck, obviously. And so that makes me a little suspect with all the undercover work and everything. Why do you release that one? I'm sure you could come up with something better, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, Bear, I'm the guy who sat across from Jordan Walker, the guy that you're talking about as the
Hmm.
not credible person. I was the
Yeah.
undercover journalist wearing the button cam, so that was the story of
Yeah, I know.
directed evolution. So
Uh,
that's a fast forward essentially in the timeline of everything. But I wasn't able to release my insider story because of, you know, there was an FBI raid that happened from this whole, vile situation. We'll put it at that, for, YouTube purposes of what we're talking about, but we looked at the vials, and then there was an FBI raid that happened a week and a half after that, and that video went viral on Stu Peters' show.
Hmm.
And then there was an FBI raid week and a half, and I was in real time, like huge red flags were happening in my brain of like, what is going on? I'm doing all this dangerous work on the inside of Pfizer, and this is, something that is happening in real time with like law enforcement, and I didn't know what to believe. And then a month after that is when James O'Keefe and Project Veritas told me, we can't release your story, but we'll offer you a job instead. And you have all of these bombshell recordings on the inside, and I mean,
So you were explain what those were, because I think I know people can go watch the movie Project Whistleblower, but just for context here, you were wearing like a little camera and audio recording device and going in and trying to strike up conversations with higher ups, right? With scientists and
yes.
stuff.
So Project Veritas provided me with this undercover recording equipment, and I essentially was using it to obtain information on the inside every single day that I was going into the office. For the most part, it literally wasn't every day. There might have been a day off I took here or there, but it it was it was really ballsy to be doing what I was doing. And I was I feel like I was strung along for 2.5, 3 months. And Project Veritas, there was the FBI raids that occurred, and then a month after that, they explained how, Justin, you were breaking these state statutes essentially, and it's not worth releasing your story because of potential lawsuits that will come down on us. And I didn't buy it because I was I was so done with the crimes against humanity that I was witnessing, um, with the emergency use authorization approval, with the formulations that essentially was a bait and switch with, the tris buffer and the phosphate buffer saline. I thought that was completely fraudulent. And with the context of what was said from my manager, Conwall, with this 50-year conspiracy, they're using the emergency use authorization to get through this mRNA technology now. And she ends the conversation saying that this whole thing is really leading to a money game, and that they're using the emergency use to use the mRNA technology in other drug products, not just for COVID. And then my conversation with her higher up, Ramin Davari, he essentially, I elicited him on the booster shots, and how, someone close to my mother passed away after taking the booster shot the same exact day. And Pfizer was the only one with the booster shot approved at the time. And he basically goes, the correlation does not equal causation. Um, it's not your job to be asking these questions, and keep your mouth shut essentially. And then links the booster shot to a chip company, and how chip company manufacturers are their their role or mindset is to engineer chips so that people keep eating chips again. And so the fact that he made that metaphor with the vaccine manufacturer and linked it to booster shots was just really interesting.
Like potato chips or computer chips?
Yes. No, not
Oh,
microchips.
oh, got
Potato
it.
chip. Yes. So, it's a silly metaphor, but still, in the grand scheme of things, with all of this information put together, as well as all of the documentation that I had provided PV, as well as a testimony coming from a scientist working directly on the mRNA platform, I believe would have blown the vaccine agenda out of the water. And the fact that I was offered a job, it was a breach of the contributor agreement contract that I had signed with them. So that's another fraudulent thing that occurred. I'm like, how are they? The power of suggestion is real too, because they knew that I didn't want to be at Pfizer anymore. They knew how bad I wanted to leave and blow the whistle on the whole thing and get this off my chest. And so, I think they took advantage of that essentially. And, I was naive. I was 23 years old. I was way too trustworthy, and I gave all of this information to them and didn't back any of the information that is now apparently on a hard drive, um, with Project Veritas that I still don't have access to. I'm trying to get it back. But I gave all this information away to them and didn't back it up for myself. So I took the undercover journalist role with the intentions, and I made a promise essentially to God that I was going to follow through and get my Pfizer story back somehow, some way, and by miracles happening, it played out that way. So
So, can we break down a couple specific ingredients, primarily graphene? Did you observe that yourself, that that was something that they were using?
no, I didn't observe it firsthand, but there were some internal emails that came to light from another whistleblower, Melissa McAtee, on the fact that they were using graphene potentially for research purposes, and they were saying, oh, this is not going into the vaccine, but there may be trace amounts in it. And Bear, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the fluorescent enzyme luciferase. Uh, luciferase is
Yeah,
an
please talk
enzyme
about
that
that.
it's found in jellyfish and fireflies, and it's supposed to only be used for research purposes,
Mhm.
which is used with lipid nanoparticles. So I was working with lipid nanoparticles, doing the analysis with them. ALC 0159 and or ALC 0159 and ALC 0315 are they're both
Mhm.
ALCs. And I came across these papers that are in my documentary that outline where the lipid nanoparticles go, and they use this luciferase enzyme to see where the lipid nanoparticle concentration goes in all of the organs of the body of these Wisterhahn
Mhm.
rats. So the huge question I was asking is just why are they using luciferase? And it's apparently just to detect where these lipids are going. But the fact that they were going to the ovaries, the testes, the heart, and pituitary gland, they were going to every organ of the body in small trace amounts of total concentration. But these lipid nanoparticles are carcinogenic. So the fact that they're going to every organ in the body is, really, it was raising my eyebrows from the inside. And, in the spiritual and esoteric conversation of luciferase, like why is it called luciferase?
Yeah,
Why can't it be
interesting.
called lipase? Just a really interesting name. And luciferase has been linked to research and development with graphene oxide. So I don't have any documentation saying graphene oxide is 100% in these vials, but um, you know, there's people saying that wasn't in any of these vials, or there's people saying that it was 100% graphene oxide. And I think it really is probably somewhere in the middle, in the sense that maybe
Mhm.
there's graphene in some of them but not all of them,
Mhm.
because of the nature of this vaccine rollout. I think some of the lots were probably these really toxic injections, and the other ones might have just been saline or some lesser version of this
Well, it
dangerous
would.
drug delivery system.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense that they aren't going to put the same thing in every single batch, because if everybody started having the same symptoms, it would, word would get out a little too quick. I believe they've had the ability to target certain organs in the body for a long time. In my early research, this goes back in the 80s, and, when I was doing a lot of work with damaged kids, and I really started, reading a lot of papers and things. I found that you could take any particular cancer, like prostate or breast, or you name it, and then there was a link that had occurred that we think it's related to this particular vaccine. And further research showed that, well, there's actually an incubation period. So if that vaccine's going to cause it, it's going to take so many months or years. And then you go into the data banks that showed that population that was vaccinated with that particular batch, you'd see at the exact end of the incubation period in that population, you had a spike in prostate cancer, breast cancer. So it's just too coincidental. And, that certain things were linked with certain organs, and the incidence matched the exact incubation time that had been, calculated. So I'm pretty convinced they've been perfecting this for quite a long time. Now,
Absolutely.
there's another element, and I don't know if this goes beyond your experience, but there seems to be good evidence that other things external to the vaccine are creating the symptoms that were attributed to the virus. Just for instance, 5G and, you name it, all the things we're all exposed to. Do you have any thoughts or any firsthand information that would lead us to believe that maybe things that were in the vaccines made people more vulnerable to the exposure to these technologies, that kind of like a 1-2 punch?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a conclusion for you. I have a
Mhm.
hypothesis of that it is
Mhm.
linked to the 5G tower rollout that was happening
Mhm.
en masse in 2019, I believe, is when they were really ramping up. That's when people were experiencing the symptoms of this virus, because
Like in
people were.
Italy, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you're spot on, Dr. Baird, that there is a correlation with the 5G tower rollouts. And then I wrote a paper actually called COVID-19 Uncovered in my Rutgers master's program for my drug discovery class, where I went into Plandemic 2, the documentary, and I went into all of the patented technology with, the viruses, the lockstep agenda, and it links it all really to this 5G tower rollout and connecting it to some form of cryptocurrency like lockstep agenda with, this vaccine really, ushering in these like vaccine passports. And, that's the hypothesis, so that it really is all connected to like this internet of bodies essentially. With the vaccine specifically, or whatever this shot is, do I have direct evidence that it like connects to the internet of bodies? No, but I've dug into, the alternative media circles, and I mean, I've even seen videos of people who were setting up these 5G towers, and there were like boxes that were saying like COVID-19 on them. So, I don't have a conclusion for you in that sense, but I do believe that there is some form of, lockstep agenda with these toxic poison bombs that I like to call them, of there is some potential form of tracking that is linked with this technology, of whether it's graphene oxide, or was there something in the needles that is now like just stuck in people's delts. I've talked to people about this firsthand, where I'm not going to name names or anything, but people have said like, "Oh yeah, I took this shot and like my shoulder just feels different." And I've seen, magnets just still sticking to people's arms. So, what is it? Is really the big question of what is going on, what were they doing to us? And we can really only ask questions, I suppose, right now, but I mean, there are many research studies with like remote neural stimulation of using magnetic nanoparticles and things of that nature. And I think that one of the best sessions from the end of COVID was Dr. Ana Maria Oliva, who she actually translated my documentary in Spanish for Spanish speakers. So if you have people who, need a translation, it's on my Rumble channel. But I think what her hypothesis and, conclusion, she doesn't like jump to any conclusions, but she explains how this is really linked to some form of Internet of Bodies agenda with, Elon Musk and Yuval Harari, I think from the World Economic Forum, and how, they talk about transhumanism, and like it's really a dark agenda, unfortunately, to witness. And I was essentially partaking in that. So um what I'm trying to say is I don't have a conclusion for you, but I believe that yes, these vaccines are part of some form of tracking agenda. I mean, I've seen the
Yeah.
research out of, I believe it was in Spain, where they were doing research with Bluetooth, and people were being pinged with MAC addresses for Bluetooth, even from like, I think half a mile away, and then they're walking towards this Bluetooth signal where people are showing up with MAC addresses. And so, just it's a lot to throw at, a young person, that's for sure, that's working on the vaccine. But I mean, I was paying attention to all of that in real time, so um I hope that makes sense. So
No, totally. And the real internet is not the electronic internet. It's the etheric substance, which carries resonance and creates a unified field. And things like the study of biogeometry or old school alchemy, and going back centuries in many civilizations, they all detailed this out and had actual technologies that would help people actually enhance that bandwidth of perception so that they could go into higher realms of consciousness. And this is anecdotal as well, but I've heard many people say that after they got the shot that they couldn't access God anymore. Just that part of themselves that, whatever that means to you as far as your spiritual awareness, it just seemed like it was shut down. And then if you look at just the physical brain structure, in the optic thalamus, it creates a little electrical arc between the pineal and the pituitary. That is, the thing that, really sparks our awareness and that ability to tune in there. So if you're doing things that are going to be shutting that down so that you cannot tune into the real organic internet, then then you're going to have problems. And it makes me kind of believe that these people are talking about something real when they say, wow, I just feel dead inside. That was a very
yeah,
common comment.
I think that's a great transition even into, I mean, I've had conversations with people that are vaccinated, and I'm not divisive with this. It's just, they've actually expressed remorse and have, to elaborate on what you're saying, Bear, I spoke with someone who was vaccinated recently, and they were saying that they're just dealing with brain fog, and they don't feel like that God gene, that connection to God anymore. They feel like they're shifted off like 10%. And Mike, with Dr. Edith, I was speaking with Dr. Edith Chan about this, and she's noticed that with her patients who, she's dealt with over all this as well, that this is all a lot of spiritual, uh, a spiritual
Warfare.
shift in a lot of people. Yeah, spiritual warfare, exactly. So you're
Well, we
spot on.
know the greatest technology in this realm is the human body, right? Well, and then how our consciousness interfaces into it, as I like to call our doer that comes in. And so, yeah, if they can disturb that divine machinery through the Luciferus and the God knows what else they put in there, that, as Bear was saying, it'll literally interfere with the electrical systems and all that's, which is divinely created for us to interface with the other realms. Then yeah, you're going to be feeling out of whack. The good thing is, and we've talked about it a lot, there's always remedy, right? There's always remedy to reverse any decisions you made. And on the flip side of that too, yeah, obviously they're trying to hijack the etheric internet realm and create a technological synthetic overlay so that they can have this hive mind populace, right? That they can just sort of control with the flip of a button and switch. And we see that already, like where you look around everyone on their phones and not engaging in the real world and in nature and all that. But that being said, there is also this, we're talking about Italy and the 5G and stuff. I think it's also quite apparent that media plays a major, major role in the symptomology of fear and the initiation of, losing your breath and stuff when you're being completely bombarded with the fear matrix of it's coming for you. You have to keep your mask on. It's around any corner the virus is going to get you. And what's ironic, and I think this could be a good segue into Project Veritas, is that in many ways, I think looking back, we can see that the quote unquote like alternative whistleblower scene is just as is culpable for spreading fear. And they play a
100%.
massive role in that. Hey, Dad, thanks. My dad's my mailman.
Hi,
And-
Kirk.
he's a big fan of the show. But yeah, and so isn't that funny that we have gatekeepers on the whistleblowers, and in a way, so you are the whistleblower of the whistleblowers, right? So you want to get into that, and sort of now you're getting this information. You see James O'Keefe as this good guy, right? Who's here to expose, and he literally doesn't allow this information to get out. And because of what, fear of raid, they had just had raids. You were saying FBI raids and stuff.
FBI raids, recording consent, and I mean, Marty and I had this discussion, and I've spoken with lawyers about this, and I mean, there's the discussion of like whether you should even be working with a lawyer if you're a if you're a living man, etc. But um, I had these concerns as well, and the fact that Project Veritas provided this equipment to me and let me do what I was doing for 2.5, 3 months, knowing that I was, quote unquote, breaking state statutes was an issue. But when you're witnessing crimes against humanity and you're dealing with this overarching vaccine that is not a vaccine and is killing people issue, and you have a scientist who's working directly on it, it was a something that trumps this quote unquote state statute that really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. And there's case law that doesn't exactly refer to my situation, but like when you get into domestic violence and witnessing crimes in the state of Massachusetts, if you record it and you release it, and it's vetted that this is legit and this is something that the public has the right to know or can be used for a case, then it's null and void, which
Well,
was.
especially when you're dealing with a product that is actually being monetized and supported by the public dollars. Well, we all know it's not public, but you know what I mean? It's all coming through government. These are military, these are military products here. So yeah, I think you would have a leg to stand on, even though we know,
Well, I was
that's
technically
corrupting
a
you at this
government
point.
contractor, or I was like contracted. I was technically like working for a government contractor because Pfizer was a contracted with the government to release these hokey pokies. So, um, I thought it was ridiculous. And so with the transition of the conversation to accepting the job at Project Veritas as an undercover journalist, my intention was to go get this Pfizer story back. And I got to see Project Veritas, what it was like on the inside, and so getting trained, it was not easy undercover journalism. I was doing a lot of, essentially gay dates of, and it's really traumatizing stuff that I was going through of like I'm a straight guy and I have to pretend to be gay in front of this guy who is a subject, because I'm trying to get information from them. So,
And
some
were
of
you
the
trained, were you directed to do that by James O'Keefe and his people? Like, hey, this is how we got to be gay. Everyone's gay when it's funny when you find out like all the cretins and all the people working inside. I mean, I'm sorry to anyone who's out there who's on that level, but it's interesting. There's this concurrent theme of just total gayness.
Yeah. Well, no one told me like, Justin, you have to be gay to do this job. No one told me that, but that's kind of like what I came to the conclusion about a month into my job is when I needed really to start accessing, because with undercover journalism, you need access to subjects, and you have to run this alias, so you have to pretend to be somebody else. So I wasn't Justin on any of my meetings. I was, Jordan or Jason or Dave or whatever the name was, so and the easiest thing for me really to do for my undercover journalism was to go on these dating apps such as Bumble or Tinder or
Yeah.
Hinge, etc. I wasn't doing Grinder, I'll say that. But
I don't even know what these are
I
references to, but I'm an
I had to
engineer.
go on
Bear and
these
I are like, what are these things? But we get it. They're like dating apps.
I
dating apps. And
my
so
imagination is connecting some dots. So
okay,
Yeah.
so with your imagination, I was on my burner phone essentially, and I had a fake name, and I was, I changed my settings so that I could be, swiped on by men and women and even trannies. Um, and so my ratio of matches with potential subjects of like people that I would go out on meetings with was like 600 guys to like 20, 30, or like 50 women total. And so the easiest thing for me to gain access to was men, so that's really a lot of what I was doing. So we did, investigations into teachers with like diversity, equity, and inclusion work where, in the state of New York, they're really, pushing like cutting kids, wieners off type stuff and pushing kids to be gay and trans. And so we were looking to get stories on that. So, I was going on meetings with gay teachers, and I felt like I had to pierce my ears. So it took me like 6 or 7 months really to get trained in undercover journalism, and then that my all of my training really leads to the biggest story at Project Veritas, Bear, that you were referring to earlier,
Hmm.
with the story on Pfizer and directed evolution. And
Hmm.
Jordan Walker was also explaining some how there were some menstrual cycle issues with the vaccine, especially in women. So um, that was PV's biggest story ever, and I was the one who got that, and so it's still James's biggest story ever as well. And to me, participating and being the journalist of that story, the undercover journalist at least that partook in all of it, once I was fully awake to terrain, and I was at the time, and we could backtrack a little bit. Like I had met Alex Zek through Zoom. I reached out to him on a Twitter DM or Instagram DM, and I was like, "Yo, like I have this crazy story to tell you." And Alec almost didn't believe me, but I'm legit. Like this has just been my life. And I was like, "Yo, I'm working at Project Veritas, but I'm this ex Pfizer scientist." And then I got that massive story that to me is dangerous on a worldwide scale, in the sense of it blew up, right? 50 million views on Twitter. And to me, it was just dangerous because it reaffirms virology, in the sense that viruses can be mutated and mutated into something that's more dangerous than what the initial virus was. And yeah, that
Bingo.
it was a huge
Hence why
subconscious
it was
program.
pushed. Get it out there. The alternative media being used as always to, like you can't have the deep real truths, right? And that's kind of where I was getting at with the original question around what is Project Veritas from your perspective, because we know on the board there's all sorts of weird like Zionist money on there and big money interests, and then you have the whole intrigue with James O'Keefe leaving and everything. So not to jump the gun here, but were you, now that you were with that whole big blow up there and that fact that they had squashed your work that you had done on the inside, how are the gears turning in your head now about Project Veritas and James O'Keefe?
So with the Jordan Walker story, I mean, I was doing a job, but I was so conflicted internally. Like my divine access was completely out the window at that point. I was like, this is gonna be dangerous. Like I know viruses aren't real. He's saying viruses can be mutated, and I didn't know it was gonna blow up into 50 million views on Twitter in a month, but it did. And that was a huge regret of mine. And so once it blew up to 11 million views literally in a day, that's where I flipped. It was a huge switch in me of just like, okay, this is propaganda to the highest degree, essentially, and I know better, so this is where I essentially turned into a double agent of, okay, like I need to get my Pfizer story back. And I mean, it's an interesting situation, Mike, because with that story, and not a lot of people know this, but with the insider footage that I obtained from Conwall and Ramin, that are essentially like my smoking gun of just the proof of what I was doing on the inside of Pfizer, I got that information back after the Jordan Walker story that was completely propaganda. So it was a quid pro quo situation. And was it worth it? I'm not sure, because that story, it blew up out of proportion to the point where I feel so guilty, in the sense that it blew up. It was subconscious affirmation and virology. And I mean, yes, you can argue that it woke up a lot of people in the sense of big pharma corruption. Sure. I won't argue that. Like that's where we can get into the layers of all of this. But, you can only question past this certain point of, okay, James O'Keefe says this, Alex Jones is saying this, but the truth is really here. So, I hope that makes sense that, this
Now,
situation,
we
so
aren't
many
making
layers.
any accusations or slandering anybody, but there's also some innuendos of certain people attending certain events at the Grove and that kind of thing without mentioning any particulars. Any truth to any of those things, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge question that needs to be asked. And I uncovered James going there to the Grove and when I went over to O'Keefe Media Group, and my heart actually was broken when I uncovered this. And there were rumblings that James was invited to the Grove when I was at PV. He actually, I mean, it wasn't even rumblings. He asked in a Microsoft Teams group chat whether he should go to Bohemian Grove or not. And the
Hmm.
overwhelming majority was like 90% no, I think 10% yes. And they were like, go do what Alex Jones did. And I mean, if he did that, that would have been super cool, I suppose. But he would have had to have set that intention. And then the whole thing with uncovering James to going to Bohemian Grove is I had found out prior to him going, and I brought it up to my journalist colleagues of like, hey, I know what's going on. Like, I know James is going. What should we do? And so we let him go in the sense of we wanted to see if he would go organically, and then he kept it from us. And then I obtained more information regarding a red tent slip that connects him to going as well. And Bear, I mean, the to answer your question about like what goes on there, I mean, I have no evidence that like there, you know, I've heard that James missed the cremation of Care apparently.
Hmm.
But I also heard that Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk were there as well.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
through a old colleague source that, is remained anonymous, but I'm willing to speak on that with you guys. That this whole thing is this overarching club that we're not in, and these people are really influential people in the media, and so I'm raising the questions of Alex Jones exposed BG in 2003 and has a lot of credibility and weight behind exposing the Grove, apparently,
Hmm.
and now we're here present day where his buddy James and I find out Charlie and Tucker were going as well. And I mean Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court justice who's also a Republican, Speaker McCarthy was caught, I mean not even caught. I mean he wore a golf shirt with the owl logo at a podium when he was Speaker of the House. And this was like right after the Maui fires happened. So I don't know. It's just this overarching conspiracy that I'm right in the middle of. And so, I was willing to talk to you guys about this in October, but I had to put all of this information into a documentary and from
Hmm.
my perspective so that it could essentially be bulletproofed into a story of like, hey, this is what I went through. And I know you're
Yeah,
up
you just
north, so
it takes a lot of discernment, that's for sure. And you just have to keep your mind open, no matter what the propaganda is. And you've got Project Warp Speed, things like that. The Republican frontrunner. You want to think that he's a good guy, and but
Well, and,
man.
and James O'Keefe during the election heading into Trump was a huge supporter, was really on the right, like doing all these big, parties and stuff and fundraisers for Trump, who obviously, did the Project Warp Speed and all sorts of other stuff. And now he's, of course, really pushing support for Israel. And you've got right like what's going on in the college campuses right now. Here we go again, like going right into election season, just like what was that, 2020? You're getting all the riot stuff going on at the campuses, George Soros funded side versus now the Trump side pushing the others. It's like cyclical over and over again. And if I think if we truly had Project Veritas really was, and like Bear is saying, we're not here to slander or make claims, right? We're just asking questions. But, did you ever talk to James O'Keefe about gain of function and the virus thing? And like, why not try to get somebody inside one of those labs to see what the heck they're really doing, or if people really there actually had a higher understanding of the in silico sort of nonsense going around variants and gain of function. I think that would be a pretty awesome undercover story.
I didn't talk to him specifically about gain of function, but I mean, from my perspective and like the background information, Project Veritas had like 12 other COVID stories that they also didn't tell. Like there were stories that they had with nurses on the inside that brought them information about like remdesivir, for example, or the ventilators killing people, or doctors essentially like just killing their patients in hospice. They one of the producers reached out to me after releasing this documentary, and they were like, yeah, we had like 12 other COVID stories that we didn't bring to light, and one of them had to do with the genome of this virus. Like they had the whole thing laid out apparently. But that that's a I don't have I haven't seen that information, so I don't know what it really looks like, or my understanding of it isn't as high as maybe you guys or Alec talking about virus genomes. But I mean, they've never been isolated in the first place, really. So
Yeah,
It's all in
it's
it's a
silico
joke.
nonsense. It's just all
yeah, all in
computer
silico.
modeling and essentially the same thing they have done with gravity, the same thing they've done with all scientism related stuff over the last 200 years. It's all theoretical. It's all math, magician nonsense. It's not based on
And the
natural science.
commonality within conventional physics, medicine, lawfare, it's all not just to keep us afraid, but to keep us limited and from our true potential. So maybe, well, anything that you need to add or that we haven't covered with your own experience, we definitely want you to go there. Real quick, while we're on etiologies, as far as disease as we think of it, germ theory and so forth. You've also got the genetic theory, and you had your own episode with some symptoms, and I believe what you're experiencing is, if they can't blame it on the germ, then they say, well, it's your genetics. You just got dealt a bum deck of cards, and you have to live with it, and you're probably going to have this happen to you. So, do you want to get into that a little bit, or do you want to
Yeah,
save that for later?
I'll touch on one other to answer more of Mike's last
Please go
question.
ahead. Yeah,
There
go ahead.
was one conversation that I did bring up with James actually about terrain, and it was on St. Patrick's Day when I was working at O'Keefe Media Group. I had recently just came over to O'Keefe Media Group, and our COO, Clarice, had a sty in her eye, like, and I came up with, oh, Clarice, you should fast because, of X, Y, and Z. Like your body will not be focusing on digestion, and it will be able to, get rid of this sty that you're dealing with. Because she's like, isn't it a virus or something that I'm dealing with? Or what is this with this sty? And I was just explaining to terrain model to her, and James was sitting right across from us, right across from me. And I explained it how virology is a complete sham essentially, and he's like, "That's really interesting, Justin." Or my code name was Bam, and he's like, "Yeah, that's really interesting way to look at it." And I mean, that's all he said about it, So the whole thing, Mike, with like bringing up gain of function and all of these like questions that I'm, bringing to light now, is that James is also really intimidating, and he also like really loved the Pfizer story and loved the directed evolution story, which really beefs up the gain of function, gain of fiction narrative too.
Fear,
That
fear. Pure the
Yes,
bioweapon,
exactly. So, um,
pure cells.
I was walking on eggshells, so I didn't necessarily bring that up like when I was really working for him. I brought up that terrain conversation at O'Keefe Media Group, and then I did call James right before I released this documentary, and I told him exactly how I felt slash know that viruses is a complete pseudoscience. And when I brought it up, he completely deflected off of it as like, he didn't answer the question of whether he knows viruses are real or not. He was like, "Oh, Justin, like when you were invited to Amfest, were you going to ambush me?" Because I mean that's a whole other backstory of that isn't even really in the documentary. But after I resigned from O'Keefe Media Group and the whole Bohemian Grove situation, James invited me to be a whistleblower at this Amfest thing,
Hmm.
and he was going to give me recognition. He wanted to give me recognition as a whistleblower for Pfizer, and I think it was really all connected to the directed evolution story and nowhere near connection to my work as a scientist and a whistleblower on the inside, based off the conversations that I had with him. And I walked away from the whole thing. That's that, it's part of the timeline essentially. So, but yeah, I brought it up to him and he completely deflected off of the difficult question of the story being propaganda. Like I'm like, James, my story is propaganda with Jordan Walker and Pfizer directed evolution. What do you have to say? And he just really didn't touch on it at all. So I think that goes to show that he's really good with deflecting off of difficult questions when he gets cornered into something, especially like with supporters asking about Bohemian Grove as well. He dances around these.
Yeah, what's he say?
He essentially says, "Oh, I don't want to reveal the identities of donors," or he goes to the donor excuse and the source's excuse of he can't reveal certain identities of certain people that he meets with, and that's all he really says. Or he dances around the whole thing entirely and won't address it. So he really hasn't addressed it publicly. um he's addressed it through text with some people, like with Melissa McAtee. She asked him like, James, why did you go? And he's like, I can't really answer that. You have to trust me. So it's a huge red flag. So that I wanted to touch on that because of your gain of function question, Mike. I hope that brings some context as to, I guess, where James is at in his deflection and the neurolinguistic programming that we've, assumed he's trained in essentially. But yeah, we could
So
get
what's your theory? What's your in theory on James? Like, what is his? Is he an asset? Is he just a man who's looking to profit off fear and whistleblowing? Is he someone who's become compromised? Maybe he had good intentions. I mean, you have a theory there.
um yeah, I have a theory that he's been part of the whole alternative media world that is meant to steer us away from the truth pretty much ever since the beginning. I mean, doing he went to Rutgers for philosophy and then he went to UCLA for law school and dropped out and then immediately started in journalism, and his dad is connected to like federal government stuff back in the 1980s. He was doing work overseas. I think it's no coincidence that he's highly connected to Tucker Carlson, whose father was, ex-CIA. I just, the fact that he's part of this group of the MAM that I call it, the mainstream alternative media and then industrial complex, it really feels that James is, maybe he wasn't literally right at the beginning. Maybe his acorn story was organic with Hannah Giles, but I don't know. I have a hard time believing it with all of these connections that he's had in politics as well. He got a scholarship to the Leadership Institute, which is a right-wing conservative institute that trains and gives scholarships to people to be right-wing conservative influencers, essentially, either in media or politics. And he got like this huge scholarship apparently, based off of research that I've done on, the internet about him. So he's connected to Leadership Institute, which is connected to Mike Pence and Jim Jordan and other politicians. So, like, how many coincidences need to happen for it to not feel like he is an organic investigative journalist and that he is some form of actor who is out there, and I'm not saying you can't have fun and dance around and everything, but, the fact that he's out there at these like CPAC events in FBI gear after getting raided by the FBI. Like, it's just, I'm raising so many, like, these questions. I just,
But like dressed up in like village people style costume, dancing.
yeah, I think it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, if you get raided by the FBI,
Does he partake in the YMCA? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, so I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
the
I just
whole,
started singing that song to myself. Um, so there, yeah, I'm keeping an eye on the chat here. There's a lot of great stuff going on. Gnostic Academy mentioned that there was also some interesting things that were you uncovered that didn't make it into the documentary. For instance, little episodes with the Connecticut police, and if there's anything that you don't want to get into, fine. But any other interesting things you'd like to share?
yeah, I'm not gonna touch on that as at this
Okay,
point.
I didn't
I
say anything.
Yeah, no, it's all
So
good. I just, I have to keep my source anonymous at this point in time. But
Okay, got it.
in terms of
Understood. Understood.
whistleblowing though, like right now we're seeing, and it's frightening, like there's two Boeing whistleblowers that have mysteriously died. One who was supposedly shot himself, and the other one who was quite healthy and all of a sudden came down with a MRSA infection, pneumonia, and died. So, and they're blowing the whistle about, unsafe manufacturing practices with airplanes and how we've seen a lot of weird stuff going on with airplanes lately. And so when you're doing this, were you ever feeling like you were taking a massive, I mean, obviously you were, but did you ever feel like was there any like sort of cloak and dagger stuff, people following you or anything, or was it all pretty much because you were, not out in the, on mainstream media, you felt pretty safe? Or what was that experience like going in and out of Pfizer with the camera and stuff? Did you ever feel like they were on to you or anything?
I don't think they were ever on to me until I, stepped out essentially with this documentary. But I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna lie in the sense of I've been doing this thing scared, like I've had heightened cortisol levels probably for the last 3 years, with what I was doing starting at Pfizer and then going to PV and ultimately being able to tell this whole story. Yeah, I had heightened cortisol levels working at PV and O'Keefe Media Group, and that's just part of doing things scared, I guess, and um, sure, in the back of my mind, I'm not stupid that whistleblowers have been taken out for exposing big things, exposing information like this. And I have this really unique whistleblower story in the sense that, I feel like I don't, I'm probably the only whistleblower that worked with a journalist organization that had to go get hired by the journalist company that he was working for that, is looking to expose crimes against humanity and then take the job to go essentially blow the whistle on both organizations. It's a such a unique situation, and the alternative media won't really touch what I'm talking about outside of, the people that have interviewed me. I mean, so shout out to, Alec and Amanda and Stu Peters and Ivory Hecker. And, there's a long list that is accumulating that of people that want to have interviewed me. And I mean, the Gateway Pundit actually wrote an article and Zero Hedge covered this, but it's not like it's gone mainstream that there was this Pfizer whistleblower who's exposed James O'Keefe, because I think they want to keep all of that under wraps because, I mean, of the, I mean, now James is like right now when we hopped on, James O'Keefe hopped on Alex Jones
Yeah.
InfoWars, and they're talking about his latest CIA expose where, they have this CIA guy who worked for Deloitte as a contractor who was blabbing about how, they kept all this information from Trump and Russia collusion, et cetera, et cetera. So did that meeting happen? Sure, I'm sure it happened. And was this guy saying these things organically? Maybe, maybe not. Was the thing a setup? I have no idea. But it affirms, the divide and conquer narrative, that's for sure. And is it getting to solve anything? Is it getting to any solutions? Absolutely not. So
Well, look at the end game of all of these ones they've chosen to cover. It's always, either pushing fear, or this seems to be pushing the promoting Trump, right? And yeah, it's another, like, it doesn't seem to really get to a place of really core truth, right? That is enlightening
Never.
and
The
no, and I mean there's
the
so much predictive programming out there too. And I mean it's
the whole yeah.
already set in stone that Trump is going to get ushered in as like the last president and be like usher in whatever this last part of the New World Order is and validate this system that they are trying to validate that so many people are questioning the validity of. So I don't know. How are you supposed to
Well,
vote
the
hard
the whole
to election fraud?
the whole conservative caucus in Congress and conservatives across the board, it's about, okay, we're going after the communist and trying to get the good guy in office, but it's no different than what we're talking about in medicine. Okay, we find out that pharmaceutical companies are up to no good, but are they ever going to talk about the fact that the philosophy that they base all the things that they do on is false, like germ theory, for instance? You're never going to hear in the conservative media that, wow, this isn't even our government. Why do we even care if Trump or whoever gets in the first place? It's a corporatized private affair. He's, vying for a corporate executive position. He's not our president. It has nothing to do with us. Or the fact that, what we really need to do is reseat our constitutional republic, which is actually doable. So no, you never get to the core of the thing. So when I hear whether it's politics, medicine, the financial system, it's all a big ruse, and
Mhm.
that's all there is to it. And
100%.
I can't, if you look at your experience, you had your eyes opened, to what was going on inside of a company. And then that just naturally led you to question other things and led you to people like Alex Zeck. And here we are all talking, and now you're talking about bioterrain, not theory, but bioterrain medicine. So when I hear a story about James O'Keefe, and he's dedicated his entire life to exposing these things, but then all of a sudden he puts the brakes on when you say, well, geez, maybe what causes disease is a little bit different than what these pharmaceutical people that you're supposedly exposing are telling us. And now all of a sudden you're a big skeptic. I just don't buy it. Sorry.
Yep. Dude, it's questioning to a certain point. You're only allowed to
Mhm.
question past or up to like what Alex Jones and what James and what Charlie Kirk and what Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan, all these people talk about. And I mean, that's where you get into the overarching conspiracy of like who is involved and like are there military contracts involved? And I actually bring all this up with IIA operations, interactive internet activities, and there was a whistleblower, Patrick Berge, from I think in the mid 2000s. I forget the exact timing, but he actually went to InfoWars with this story, and it's a bombshell, and InfoWars really like was tweaking his story because of the fact that InfoWars and Alex Jones are really involved with all of this. And so I've researched into Patrick, and I've actually spoken with Patrick through DMs at least. And he knows that I'm legit based off of just how I'm organic and how I've been acting as a whistleblower. But Bear, I wanted to add on to what you were saying about the constitutional republic and how Trump is vying for a corporate position. That is the most important thing that we should really be talking about outside of virology and versus germ theory. Those are the two most important things that I see that we need to wake people up to, and I'm not a big like, oh, we need to shake people awake, but it really is like it's a race to wake up the masses at this point. Otherwise, like everyone's just going to end up killing themselves um, from this machine system. So I think that those are the most important things we should be talking about: constitutional republic and restoring that, as well as getting to
Mhm.
the root cause of I mean, the propaganda and the lies and getting to, okay, like all of medicine is complete fraud, you know? So, and then I think that would be a cool transition into the genetic conversation about what tuberous
Sure.
sclerosis, you
Well,
know,
that's what I was going to say. Like the whole start of this was because of your malady, and you went down a certain path and you realized that that path is all illusion and fiction. And it's by doing the work and by standing up for what's right and truth, you have now been led to those who are on the same level, the same resonance. And this leads you to Dr. Berlando.
yep, absolutely. Dr. Bear, Alex Zek, Amanda, Dr. Amanda Volmer, Dr. Andy Kaufman, Dr. Tom Cohen, like all, you know, Dawn Lester, God bless Dawn. Um, you know, coming across all you guys during it really was in the heart of my time at Project Veritas where I was getting into terrain in the thick of it, like reading Dawn's book, you know, on the plane rides that I was traveling across country and just really getting into terrain was
Mhm.
unreal. So, I mean, my biggest thing that I ask questions about still is like I have, you know, I have these symptoms. You know, I have these raised bumps on my back. I have, you know, I have raised bumps on my face. You know, it's I don't necessarily, you know, I don't have like a smooth face necessarily, and it's like I want to be that, you know, I want to get to the bottom of things, you know, and really get a good understanding of why this happened to me. And I mean, my hypothesis right now is that it really is the root of just vaccine injury ultimately. But you know, people have told me that I have this mutation of this TSC2 gene called the tumor suppressor gene, and it's linked to the mTOR protein that has to do with autophagy and cell death. You know, so that hypothesis kind of does make some sense to me. But Dr. Bear, I'd love to talk to you about this in the sense of I mean, I'm not sure if you're familiar with mTOR or mTOR C1 and these tumor suppressor genes that are attached to mTOR, but that's really like the basis of this, you know, these mutations that we're dealing with. So I'd love to chat with you about genetics, as you know, I've heard people say that genetics are completely fraudulent and that we don't really have an understanding of what genes really are. So, you know, I asked that to you.
This could be an all-day seminar, but let's just try to give you the cliff notes. To really, well, for instance, if we're talking to somebody who's never heard the concept that germ theory is a bunch of malarkey, and meanwhile they say, "Well, I got this staph infection on my arm, you know, and it's everybody knows it's from staphylococcus." So it really takes a lot of re-education to bring them up to snuff on all the factors that are actually causing that malady and why what they've been taught has nothing to do with it. So it's a little bit of a difficult, and it probably takes more unlearning than it does learning in order to understand these things. So to get into the genetic question, number one, you see that we always are given an external factor that is doing it to us, whether it's a germ, whether it's our genetic, makeup and so forth. In order to understand, you have to go into a different level of science where you can validate that form is always a product of energetics. And when we talk about energetics, we can get into waveform physics, we can get into etheric mechanisms and things that would actually explain this much more logically than what you're talking about as far as names of genes and molecular components, which are above my pay grade because I really don't care about any of that stuff because it has nothing to do with reality. On the other hand, when you know the mechanisms of what precipitates matter, including our biology, you realize that you cannot have a physical structure, an experience, or a condition unless there is a predisposing energetic, and that includes our genes, so-called. Genes are an expression of energy, and genes do not determine a thing. Now, all I can say is that in my own experience, seeing a lot of folks for a long time, they came in with genetic so-called conditions. Well, they overcame those conditions when we paid attention more to the underpinnings that were creating those genetic factors in the first place. I'm also convinced, it's another lengthy conversation, but I'm convinced also that what we were taught about as far as gene structure and so forth is not really entirely accurate. Just like cellular theory, cellular membranes with all these mechanisms in the membranes transporting things back and forth, sodium, potassium pumps, and so forth. We're finding out, wow, biology really doesn't work that way. And so, what we're really talking about is the understanding of how resonance, which is carried through etheric mediums, not only the overlying etheric medium that controls our whole, or that is the canvas for our entire realm, but our own miniature replication of that etheric mechanism, which is in our own biology. Then those things that are carryovers from past experiences, beliefs, emotions, the things we take on as far as indoctrinations from the collective, programming, all those things are what create those conditions. Now, a lot of people say, well, my dad had the same thing, so that proves genetics. No, all it proves is that you're a chip off the same, same old block, and that those energetic predispositions were passed on. And maybe, somebody in the laboratory sciences, molecular biology and everything can isolate certain chemical factors that are common to both of you, but they're a product of the energetic component that was passed on through family lines, not, a genetic thing that you were born with, and now you're predetermined to experience something like that. Now, a lot of folks in alternative circles will say, well, genetics are true, but that doesn't mean you have to express those genetics. Well, now at least we're getting a little bit away from determinism. At the same time, though, we're giving credence, just like, well, the same thing with our conversation with vaccines. Well, there's all these things going on, but, germ theory is really true. So you kind of stay in the same box. So in all of this, we have to get completely out of the box, whether it's politics, finances, medicine, it's all the same thing. We have to evaluate everything. And in the case of medicine, we have to go into the real science of waveform physics, what the old alchemists told us about, and also what people are understanding and being able to measure and reproduce firsthand within fields like biogeometry, which I'm a big practitioner of. That proves that we can not only measure these things that I'm alluding to, but we can also reproduce those things that bring the life force back into situations and in specific planes of our consciousness that are carrying forth those old programs that keep things going through familiar lines, or bringing life force back into environments which, are now dead zones and no longer feeding our life force so that we can thrive, prosper, and, have a high sense of well-being. So those are the sciences that a lot of us are now not just leaning towards, but actually practicing. And when you do that, just like bioterrain medicine, you find that genetic predispositions don't really have anything to do with symptoms, just like germs and so forth. So, all we can do best for this conversation is just kind of keep it within a general context, but please take it any more specific if you'd like to.
Well, I can take it a little bit more specific. There's the conversation to be had even about chromosomes, like with tuberous sclerosis complex, this disease with this really long name that I'm given at the age of 10. They said that the chromosomes that have mutations on them for this disease are chromosomes 9 and 16. And so, I wonder, like, how did they determine 9 and 16, and why? If what you're saying is true, and I believe everything that you are saying is the truth, versus this fraud of the allopathic medicine model and the research that has really gone into the rabbit hole of it. They've gone into all of that saying that there's these two causative genes for tuberous sclerosis. Like, how did they get to that? And like with the testing, I think I got tested on it when I was, like 12 or 13, and they said, "Oh, you had a mutation on your TSC2 gene, which is in chromosome 16 or something." But like to me, it's just the fact that we're having this conversation of whether genetics and chromosomes, like, are chromosomes real, or is that real? Are they real?
Yeah, and the reality is usually much different than what we've been taught. And everything I learned in conventional science and medicine are gross extrapolations based on theoretical constructs. And also, if you're around long enough, as I have been, you find those theories just keep changing to justify the next theory. And they're usually based on, look at the COVID test, PCR. They take genetic fragments or fragments of DNA, and then they amplify them to the extent that now they can make that, tell us anything we want to be told. It's no different than any other level of medical and scientific research. Science we use loosely. However, what they don't get into and what they will never even get close to is talking about the actual mechanics, again, of the etheric mechanisms. And we would say etheric, that's not woo woo because we can measure it, we can reproduce it. And when we do that, we can target things in such a way that we actually produce observable results. That's what you do in bioterrain medicine. That's what you do in biogeometry. So rather than staying in a situation where we're in theoretical constructs and things just keep getting worse, but then we get into these, other levels of science that universities will not touch, and that produces the solutions and results we want. It's more than circumstantial after a while. So I question all of that kind of research you're talking about because they're looking at little fragments of a certain level of reality, and then they're filtering all of their experience through that mental construct to make the pieces fit. And the proof of the pudding is they never come up with solutions, and things keep getting worse, and people keep getting sicker. So where are we going with all that? What good has it done? Other than the surgical technologies that have their time and place, in a limited way, which is just more of a mechanical process. When we get into the other realms of understanding chronic degenerative diseases that are more and more epidemic by the day, we're not getting anywhere. In fact, we're going in the wrong direction. So somebody like yourself, all I can say is if you go down a different road, you get different results. So we have to explain why that is. And you can't explain it with genetics.
And I'll just add a tail on that. Essentially, what they're doing is they're looking at after effects and attributing them to cause.
Okay.
Just like they're
Yeah.
trying to find energy and matter. And then, in order to create energy, we keep mining things out of the earth and then, just creating explosion technologies and, in order to produce energy in an entropic manner that just keeps destroying ourselves and destroying our ecosystem. We don't have to do that. And when in fact,
Isn't it
when
funny
you
how
understand that energy creates matter, now you can go right to the source and not have to consume your environment or your body, sacrifice your body in any way in order to get results.
I mean, I'm loving this conversation. I know it's towards the tail end of everything, but the after effects from the results, Mike, I think it's really interesting because the situation with tuberous sclerosis complex, the diagnosis of it specifically, the fact that they're able to recognize this dis-ease in 98, 99% of people that are diagnosed with it, by the age of 2, I find really interesting in the fact that I was able to skate by up until the age of 10. So I just like my after effects were different than most people with this dis-ease, and it it goes to just show that I think everybody is different and they deal, everybody's terrain is different, and the way that our psyche actually handles with like vaccine injury is really interesting, that from a very young age, people's psyche could be impacted from this injury for the rest of their lives. Like this dis-ease is really debilitating. I've seen and met people with the same types of lesions on my face
Right.
and or the shagreen patches or are just diagnosed with TSC in general. And like there are kids that I met at, I when I was 12, 13 years old, I think, I was doing volunteer work with the Tuberous Sclerosis Alliance, and I got to meet a bunch of people in this world that were connected to TSC, and they do a TSC mile walk instead of a 5K as a fundraiser because the whole thing is just, a lot of these people are they up to 60% of people with this diagnosis need daily assistance from a caretaker, essentially, or, someone has to be helping these people a lot of the time, and they don't really get to live fulfilling lives, so that was a huge force as to my
Yeah.
critical thought and getting to the bottom of everything as to like why did I get so lucky, I suppose. I'm fully functioning. I'm able to go to college. I'm able to, work in the real world. And there are others like me as well. There's the
Oh,
scale
I
of
got a theory. You're saying that most of it is at 2 years old, their prognosis, so they get them right into the allopathic model there, into the sick model.
right away. Yeah.
And so now
Here's
they're
here's another absolutely. Another consideration is, there are many sclerotic conditions, but based on where in the body it occurs, then we have a different diagnostic label for it. The toughest thing I had in my clinical practice was getting people to lose their labels. Those labels become so imprinted in our consciousness that they create the exact resonance that perpetuates the condition in the first place. And again, that can be proven with other levels of science that we are not taught. So, you can look at a real epidemic these days is neurological disorders. Now, okay, what do we have? We have multiple sclerosis, ALS, Parkinson's, dementia. So what's common, and those, a lot of them were very rare at one time. Now they're all epidemics. So if we look at our exposure to neurotoxins, it's absolutely off the charts. And the incidence of those illnesses or afflictions coincidentally has escalated with the escalation of our exposure to neurotoxins, stuff they're spraying in the sky and so forth. Now, somebody with the same exposure might get, a deterioration at their neuromuscular junction. So now you have something we call ALS. Another person with the same exact exposure, might get demyelinization of the nerves. It's still something affecting the neurological tissues. But now you have MS. Somebody else might get affected at the amygdala portion of the brain. Now you have Parkinson's, but it's all the same damn thing. And when you get into bioterrain medicine, you aren't so much concerned with the label or what part of your body is exposed or what your particular vulnerabilities for getting that symptom versus somebody else getting a symptom somewhere else from the same exact exposure. No, you go to work and you find out why the bioterrain became vulnerable to that in the first place. That's real medicine. And it's not labeling stuff. It's just not thinking up, what do we call this shit? And now you've got it. And now, but don't worry, we're working on a drug that might help you.
Yep.
And we have real hope for this new drug. And hey, we got you accepted into this group, where they're willing to give it to you. Um, I mean, come on, folks. It's,
Barry, you're
yeah.
spot You're spot on. And Mike, I think you're spot on too with the fact that they're able to suck people in and get people in the allopathic model initially, and then probably the symptomology either never gets better or if not, worsens, and so I was doing MRIs at, the age of 10, 11, 12, and God knows what they were actually injecting into me during, in the middle of MRIs. I don't even remember, but I remember they were injecting something into my arm, which couldn't have been healthy for those scans, and the scans themselves too are not healthy with all the radiation that you're getting in the exposure, so like they were saying that I have little small benign tumors called hematomas on I apparently have like two small specks on my brain and two small specks on my kidney that are like, that big in this space between my fingers essentially, but it's is like that even real? Are they just theorizing that, oh, this little speck is a tumor,
Or if you look at growth period in the body, they're a biological expression. That's another whole story. But then on a pure biological level, it is the body that is walling something off that it has been exposed to, and it is bringing more cellular mass into the area. We call it benign or otherwise, based on the differentiation of cells. On the other hand, the cellular mass is increasing in order to bring oxygen into that area where the body has intelligently sequestered things off that it doesn't want to have going systemic to compromise your entire health. And by bringing oxygen in, it arrests the fermentation process that's going on within that area of the growth. And then that's a way that the body can turn things around. It will also have innate organisms migrate into the area that are going to help gobble up the dead tissue and all the stuff when the tumor or the growth or whatever we want to call it has done its job. And if you get into biotrain medicine, you can understand the mechanisms and support what the body is trying to do rather than trying to kill it, label it, or sacrifice the entire body and your longevity in the process by trying to poison your entire system to kill that one little spot. It's so barbaric and primitive. It blows my mind.
Same.
Oh, the good thing is people are finding the truth in their own realm, and the decentralization of medicine and spirituality and technology is the way forward, and we're big proponents of that. And Justin, you are now on your own path towards healing, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That's what's exciting. Well, hey man, this has been an amazing, amazing chat. Anything you want to end on today?
Well, first off, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Bear, so much for having me on. I can't thank you enough. And I can't wait to see you guys in June for Music and Sky. So, for those in the audience, if you want to meet me, I'll be speaking at Music and Sky to share my story in person and really what it takes to be a whistleblower, what it takes, the courage and just we're all really whistleblowers in the end. We just don't call ourselves that. I've labeled myself that, but I really don't want to label myself that anymore. It's more just part of the story now. But for those who want to check out my documentary, it's called Project Whistleblower. The website is justintegrity.net, and it's embedded right into the platform. And if you want to watch it, you can watch it on Rumble, BitChute, Odyssey. It's on Unite. I got a whole list of platforms. It's on Clout Hub as well. So check out Project Whistleblower if you have not. I've had people tell me they've watched it like 12 times and it's like the best documentary they've ever seen at this point.
It's
Uh,
amazing.
just because it's really like it's been my life and it's just a depiction of over the last 3.5, 4 years of what I've had to go through. And there are also we didn't get to touch on this, but there are other whistleblower stories that I brought up with Kim Witsack and Raymond Bouchard. Their stories were not brought to light at O'Keefe Media Group, so I included them in a chapter as well. And in regards to what I'm going to be doing in the future, Mike, we were talking about that earlier, and I'm still, truly finding my way in the sense of what I'm going to be effective at and be able to do. But considering I come from the allopathic science realm, and then I come into this investigative journalism role and, producing a documentary, co-producing a documentary with Marty to tell this story. I have a lot of options. I really would love to get into healing people like yourself, Dr. Bear. I mean, I think what you do is truly incredible, and it's one of the most powerful things that people can be doing is healing. So I would love to get into healing and get trained in bioterrain medicine and continue to do investigative journalism, I suppose, in the form of podcasting and writing and telling people's stories and forming like what the Just Integrity Network, what I envision is really creating like a whistleblower community network to work with trustworthy people and trustworthy journalists. I mean, we're all really journalists here too. Anyone can be a journalist. James
Yeah.
O'Keefe has literally said that. So, I'm looking to form a community through the Just Integrity Network, Project Whistleblower community as well, so that, if there are people who have influential whistleblower stories that they need a trustworthy storyteller to come to, I would love to help facilitate that, and it's not really just going to be me. I'm going to work with other trustworthy journalists as well across the US, across the world. But that's what I see. But who knows? I could have just stayed inside Pfizer and worked there forever, but I've been following my gut, went to journalism, and now I'm here. So I'm young, I'm 26. I got, the world is my oyster. So, we will see
And
where.
and thank you so much for spending time with us. And it does my heart extreme good knowing that the next generation is taking up the great work, we'll say. And I look forward to meeting you at the Music
Yeah,
and Sky.
looking forward
We
to
can sit
it.
around the campfire together in front of the giant owl and have a good time.
Yes, absolutely. We'll bring a giant owl.
Oh, that'll be fun, man. When you come out on stage, I might have to drop some too short, blow the whistle. Blow the whistle. Okay. Hey,
Thanks, my friend.
thank you so much,
You guys.
Justin. Hey, yeah, his website is in the show notes below. Please go check out the movie, and also, if you feel compelled, please donate, because one thing Justin and I have talked on the back end, it's like it's difficult to like do what he does and not, it's a full-time job that he's trying to really to, as we titled this show, truth as vocation. And how do you earn money to do that, to pay the bills and all that? It's by the goodwill of the folks out there that want to donate to Justin, because he put this out for free. He put out the documentary for free. So show him some love there. And yeah, Justin, thanks so much. We'll see you, man, before we know it, in Northern California at
Yep.
Music and Sky.
So
And can't wait to see you, bud, again.
yeah, I can't wait to see you guys. The website for the donation for the audience, if you're curious, givesendgo.com/project whistleblower. And yeah, to touch on what you said, Mike, I appreciate you mentioning that, just because if anyone feels called to, I appreciate it, just because, I'm looking to get off my feet. I released this for free. So people have called me a grifter, but I really did all of this for free as a public service thing. So, you know, much love to you guys. Appreciate it. Can't wait to see you guys soon. So much love to you both, and we will talk soon.
Awesome, brother. Hey guys, thanks for catching the show live today in the chat. It was great. If you're listening, please, yeah, you can always find us on YouTube, unite.live, Rumble, Odyssey, or we do remaster this as a podcast, and we're on all those great channels as well. Remember to get outside, get your feet in the dirt, go plant something, go for a hike, go show Mother Nature some love. She'll show it right back in tenfold. And we'll see you next week for another great show. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend. Love you.